The miter saw is one of the most useful tools in the workshop, used where precise angles and finest finish work are required. If you are serious about woodworking or construction, this is a tool you should become familiar with. In this video, we're going to look at the miter saw from the angle of safety and operation. The miter saw is a relatively easy tool to use. However, this is often confused with how safe the tool is. This is not the case. With the blade spinning at approximately 140 miles an hour, it only takes a split second to change the course of a life drastically if the saw is used incorrectly. Accidents can be prevented if you are properly informed and well prepared for the procedure you are attempting to complete. There are three types of miter saws. There's the standard miter saw, the compound miter saw, and the sliding miter saw. Sometimes the sliding saw will also be labeled as a sliding compound miter saw. Let's discuss the parts of the tool before we discuss operation of the miter saw. You have the operator handle, which also includes a switch. You have the blade guard, which should never be raised manually while you're cutting. You have the fence, which the stock should always be tight against the fence while you're cutting at the point where it's sawing. You have a table and a table insert. The insert is replaceable and the blade should be recessed into it during a cut. You have the miter scale and miter lock knob. The miter scale is essentially a protractor. The miter lock knob is what you adjust when you want to change the angle of cut. The bevel adjustment is usually found on the back of the saw. And the lockdown pin holds the saw down when it's not being used. In woodworking classes, it is suggested that the saw be locked down when you are finished with it, and the next person should raise it back up to help protect the blade. Before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the instructions that come with your power tool and its manual. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there's no more important safety rule than to wear these, your safety glasses. Before doing any sawing operations with the miter saw, you need to make sure that the saw is held securely in place either by clamps or bolted to the workbench. Cut. When you're using the miter saw, you need to clamp or hold the work securely in place. In woodworking classes, the instructor requires that the students use the clamp down device that is attached to the saw or some sort of C-clamp to secure the work. If you need to use a standard C-clamp to secure the work, make sure it will not come in contact with the motor as it comes down during the cutting operation. In fact, it is recommended to always use a clamp or some sort of hold-down device. It will not only be a safer cut, it will ensure a more accurate cut since the board will not have the opportunity to move during the cutting operation. What is the smallest piece you can cut on the miter saw? All pieces need to be clamped securely in place, as was previously mentioned, so do not attempt to cut a board that cannot be held securely with the onboard clamp or any other type of clamping device. Attempting to cut a piece that is too small will ultimately result in endangering the operator during the procedure. It is important when you're using the miter saw to maintain a 6-inch margin of safety at least from either side of the blade. In woodworking classes, however, the students are instructed not to have their hands anywhere on the metal surface of the table, only on the extensions, or if the board is clamped as it should be, they can operate the saw just one-handed. The reason this 6-inch margin of safety is so important is humans develop habits that they do without even thinking about it. For example, I'm right-handed, I can place my left hand here on the side of the saw. For about 2/3 of my cutting operations, it's not in any danger whatsoever. It's maintaining the 4 to 6-inch margin of safety. However, if I was to make a left-handed miter cut, the yellow danger zone on the tool is covered up by the board, so it's not apparent that my hand's in danger at the start of the cut. As the saw comes down, I'm concentrating on my cut, and the blade comes in contact with the operator's hand, ultimately ending up in disaster. Therefore, if you remember the rule not to put your hand anywhere on the metal surface of the table, you will never be in violation of the margin of safety, and always ensuring proper, safe cuts using the miter saw. Always operate the saw with the guard in place. There's never any time during the cutting operation that's necessary to raise the guard manually. As you cut, the blade guard comes up automatically on its own. If you were to try to raise the guard manually, you might accidentally lean it to one side, which the blade would then come in contact with the plastic guard, ultimately cutting through it and ended up possibly cutting the operator's hands, again ending up in disaster. There is never a reason to place your hand below the intended line of cut at any time during the cutting operation. You're all set up and lined up with your cut. Be sure to check that the miter lock knob and the hold down device are tightened and securely held in place. Keep the saw moving at a pace that is not too fast to cause kickback, but not too slow to leave burn marks. Push the saw all the way down until it stops. Release the trigger, wait for the saw to stop, then allow the saw to lift back up. Do not just let go. Be sure to inspect your stock for nails, screws, or other items that could cause damage to the blade. Even new lumber from the home center will most likely have a UPC code stapled to the end. You always want to use support for long pieces. This will prevent the board from tipping up into the saw blade during the cutting operation. A person is not the most acceptable hold down device. However, it is better than not having any at all. A person could accidentally, or a helper could accidentally rotate the board during the cut, endangering both operators. The saw, be sure to push the saw down and push in the locking pin. This also makes it easier to transport without damaging the blade or the head. To release it, push down on the head mechanism and pull out the pin. Without pushing down, the pin will not release. Do not attempt to rip, cut, or create notches in boards that are extremely narrow, as this one is. This will ultimately end up pulling the board through the fence and causing kickback and possibly injuring the operator. Got some basic operation of the miter saw. It's called a miter saw because miter is another word for the term angle. The general purpose of the miter saw is to cross cut and not rip cut. Cross cutting to exact angles is what it's best at. It can, with the relationship of the table to the fence to the blade, it can ensure accuracy cut after cut after cut. Another advantage to the miter saw is the opportunity to set up a length stop, or a stop block as some people call it. This is where you set up a block a certain distance from the blade and use that to repeatedly cut multiple pieces of the same length without having to measure each time in between, and ensuring the accuracy of all of them being exactly the same at the same angle.